Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Cheugy. Have you ever been accused of being cheugy? This is a new word for me, but I am assuming my kids are about to start using it in relation to me. To be cheugy is to be someone who is doing things that are outdated and trying too hard. RJ, you've got kids who are the oldest here. Have you ever been accused of being cheugy?
No. Cringe, definitely.
Really?
Maybe that's the former. Was it cheugy? Is that what it is?
Cheugy.
But I'll ask Spencer when I get home, and hopefully I get a big eye roll. That's what I'm hoping for. Just the biggest eye roll.
I mean, asking about being cheugy is itself cheugy, I'm assuming.
It is.
Right, Sarah?
It is. So it'll be a very meta moment. But no, I've not heard that word.
I found this on Katie Couric's newsletter, which I highly recommend. I get it every morning in my inbox. I love it so much.
I met her in a bathroom once.
Did
Go
you?
on.
What?
I did. Wait,
Wahoo
no.
wah.
I guess so. Coming out of the bathroom. Anyway, continue.
I was like in a bathroom.
I know. I think I did. Go on.
Okay. It's just like, I just think it's like very news you can use. It's super digestible. There's always shopping. I love it. So anyway, she had this piece about being cheugy, that one of her daughters had used the term. And what is it? It basically means like trying too hard.
It's a way of saying you're part of an outdated generation, I think.
Yes.
She talks about how she posted a picture of herself on Instagram. I know we've sort of jumped right into the middle of this, but she's posted a picture of herself with an enormous water bottle that's got some slogans on it that say like "keep going" or "you're almost there," and gets a one-word DM direct message from her daughter Carrie that just says "cheugy," all caps.
Can we just say it was really nice of her daughter to not write that in the comments?
Yes, I think so. I mean,
what is the etymology? What's the etymology of cheugy? Where does that come from?
She does not give this to
Cringe makes sense to me. Does not get
Is
into
it French?
Really?
Like, I don't.
Like, how is like gnarly? I get like my.
I
hair.
mean, my college students. First of all, I'm sure have 100% used this word about me, like 100%. But I also, like, every time I'm around them, I learn a new, like, phrase or word. And I will say it to them. Like, I'll be like, oh my gosh, like that, like, where did you get that from? And they'll all look at me like, I mean, we all say that. And I'm like, oh, okay, right.
Yeah.
Is it like a steam-powered locomotive? Like choo-choo? Like what? I don't understand.
I think you're sounding incredibly cheugy even caring about the etymology
I'm embarrassed, but inquiring minds want to know.
I'm going to say the cheugiest thing, okay?
Okay, what do you got?
It's probably from a rap song.
It's probably from those kids with their rap music.
Oh, those kids with their rap music.
This is what Katie Couric writes. She says, sadly, this was not the first time my daughter had described something I was doing with that newfangled term that oozed with disdain. So what exactly does cheugy mean? Well, it's a neologism coined in 2013 and popularized by Gen Z as a pejorative to describe lifestyle trends associated with the early 2010s and millennials. It also describes people who are the opposite of trendy or are trying too hard. So then Couric talks about a list from BuzzFeed about things that are currently considered cheugy. And here you go, guys. Leggings. Graphic tees, jean jackets. I love jean jackets.
They gotta be a comeback. It's time. Come on, isn't it? Isn't it a comeback for? Okay.
I literally have a jean jacket coming to my house that I ordered the other day.
You just a cheug fest over there at the Condon House.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty
Enjoy
much.
watching The Office, Friends, or How I Met Your Mother. So sorry, those made the list too. But the biggest
my teenage sons do that. So okay, continue.
The biggest affront on the BuzzFeed list of cheugy things is lasagna. How can this
love
hearty...
that they're going for lasagna, which is my favorite food. But
But how could it be so hopelessly out of fashion? We're trying too hard. That's what Couric asks. So she then ends with a sort of a very sweet thing. She says, I actually don't mind these youngsters calling me or anyone else out. After all, they've been through hell, robbed of their youth because of COVID, and saddled with anxiety and depression because of the screwed up world they're inheriting. And didn't we accuse our elders of being cheugy in our own way? Wasn't tuna fish casserole cheugy? Cheugy is just a new word for a younger generation claiming their place in culture. Out with the old, in with the new. So for now, I will bask in my cheuginess. I will wear my leggings and throw my jean jacket over a graphic t-shirt. After all, one person's cheugy is another's timelessness.
I love Katie.
The sweet note. I mean, I think that sometimes she's got a playful approach to cultural trends. And fashion is, as we know, it has one side, it has this enormous creativity and just outburst of color and interest and just cutting edge things. On the other side, fashion can be absolutely judgmental and the thing that makes you feel terrible if you're trying to follow trends or if you're perceived as you have style or you don't have style. I think fashion's it's so fascinating basically because it goes in and out, because it's always cutting edge, and yet it cuts both ways. You know, you remember the times that people have told you you're wearing something or doing something that is simply, in their parlance, cheugy or simply not acceptable or not cool or the opposite of cool. What do you? I find cultural. This is it kind of borders on little L law and trying to conform, and yet where Couric is seeing it as sort of an expression of like, it's our time to just to take over a little bit or to have something positive about our own experience that's not defined by yours because we've had such a hard time, right? I mean, is that what RJ? You don't seem to be buying it.
RJ's not into this.
I totally buy it, but this is also, my boys always ask me, Dad, why do you always wear a polo, khaki shorts, and Docksiders? I'm like, because I've given up, you know, and people were wearing this 30 years ago, and they'll be wearing it 30 years from now.
That's true.
I'm not risking being cheugy, and because I don't have time to think about that stuff. I also don't want to risk it. Honestly, I don't want to risk anything that might make me look stupid.
I would say you don't have time to think about it.
He does.
Because I think a lot of people are really busy, but some people really love to think about it. Like, I think it's like you look at cars.
You have time to do that.
Sometimes, yes.
And sometimes.
It's true.
And
I do.
I enjoy clothes. Like, I do think
but fashion, when you're wearing it, like, it's really out there. Right, I can look at my cars in my private time and nobody has to know. Right,
it's
Dave
so
can be
true.
obsessed with Garbage Pail Kids and nobody has to know.
And nobody has to know.
But fashion, you're literally wearing it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's a risk every time you walk out your door that I'm not willing to take at this stage of my life.
Very fun to me.
I mean, Sarah's the theater kid here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was always kind of a crazy dresser. My mom was a crazy dresser. Neil, like this past week for church, layered 3 different shirts and put a bow tie on top of them. So like, it's kind of our bag, you know, like. So I sent this to you all because I just thought it was super gracious. Because so often this kind of intergenerational stuff, which we talk a lot about, is not gracious at all. And, you know, I'm around Gen Z people, and y'all, they will walk up for lunch, and it will look like Claire Danes from My So-Called Life. I mean, they are like firmly in the 90s right now, and they're beautiful, and they're doing more interesting things. And like, one thing I love is like they're all very comfort oriented. You know what I mean? So the skinny jeans are out, and they're in these like high waisted mom jeans, and it's like because they're comfortable. And I don't know. I also love this idea, and I see Katie Couric doing this a little bit where like you kind of step aside, right, when younger people come in and let them take up their space. And I think there's something really, instead of being hypercritical and saying like, oh, we used to wear that, like you're just like, oh my gosh, like they're exploring who they are and who they are in this world, and they have been through so much. So I thought it was so lovely. But
No, I like it too. I think there's I find trendiness to be something I've always found to be more interesting than oppressive, because it yields so much fruit. There's this, and yet the cyclical nature of it does sort of suggest, hey, there is nothing new under the sun, and yet then you see something new. We were watching that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie again the other night, and I thought, this feels so new to me. This is like something I hadn't really seen before, and it feels really positive, and it doesn't feel like a throwback at all, even though it incorporates other stuff.
Yeah.
And I find that to be sort of a reason for living. I mean, I love that side of things. I wonder, as my kids, one of my sons is very actually into fashion, especially as it relates to sneakers and hype wear and stuff like that, and branding. And it's a whole different area that I don't have any. He thinks I dress like a total nerd as well, RJ. But
if the shoe fits.
But I also look at the sneakers he's interested in, and half of them are the ones that we grew up with, like the Air Max 3s or 360s and the Jordan 4s and stuff like that. But then another half of them are these insane new things that are just exploding the possibility of a sneaker. Yeah. And I think to myself, I want to encourage this in him, while at the same time I personally just want pants that don't fall down. It's like I don't necessarily need to. I don't care how I look at this point in my life, or at least I care about looking like I don't care about how I look. Let me put it that way. What do you think,
disheveled,
Sarah?
Carefully disheveled.
Well, isn't that what the internet taught us? Is that we're all pretending pretty much all of the time?
Yeah, I mean 100%. So yeah, but I we share that. I have a son who's like we're on our second pair of Hardens. Like he loves flashy tennis shoes, and
me too, 100%.
They're just beautiful. I mean, they're really beautiful. Like the colors, and it's so interesting. And
the colorway, the colorways. That's what they're called.
Yes, yeah. And I don't know. I love it. I mean, there was this guy at our church, and I remember he was like this very accomplished, had worked under the Bush administration, like had this whole life. And we were over for dinner at their house with another older couple. And the other gentleman who was a guest said to this parishioner, like, don't you wish the young people would listen to you more? Like, shouldn't they be paying more attention to you? Like, you have so much to say. And he was like, no, like, this is the time when I get out of the way. And it made such a big impact on me, So I don't know. I just love
getting out of the way.
Getting out of the way.
That doesn't mean that we don't want to see and hear from Katie Couric all the time. She's a delight.
No, but I do think there can be this reactionism when we feel called out as like older, where we're just like, we're so important and you shut up. And I just think that's like so unhelpful,
For me, it's like I see a lot of kids these days wearing like reprinted concert shirts from like, I don't know, the Rolling Stones or the Police or something like that. Yeah. And you want to be like, name 3 songs, or me. And it's like, that's the worst tendency I have I repent right here. But
that never occurs to me, but I love that.
I want to see you do that. I want to see you with a camera, like walking up to these kids
with a mic.
That's what I want to see. Name 3 songs.
Well, I want him to start a chorus. Like I want him to sing it and then shove the mic in their face.
It's like I saw a kid wearing a Pink Floyd Animals tour shirt, and I was like, hey, are you excited that there might finally reissue Animals with a box set? It hasn't happened. Why'd they do The Wall and not Animals? And the kid looked at me as like, wait, what? And I just thought, I felt so chuggy. I was like, you're wearing a shirt that's actually advertising something that really happened. But
you overwhelmed the poor kid. Yeah. It's like, why is this old person talking to me?
That is amazing, Dave.
Let me never talk to him again.
You just need to walk and be like, don't stand, and then just shove the mic in his face.
Exactly. So let's keep talking about the younger generation. I think this is interesting. There is a long interview in the New York Times Magazine with Laurie Santos this week. Laurie Santos teaches a course on happiness, psychology and the good life at Yale University. It has become one of the school's most popular classes. In fact, the first year it was offered, nearly a quarter of undergraduates of the student body enrolled. Now, either she's just an amazing teacher, which it sounds like she is. She's got a podcast too. Don't we all? But
What does that mean?
It's noticed like all these high. The interviewer is interesting because all these high achieving kids who seem to have certain things figured out. They don't know how to be happy, and they're very interested in like what this means, how to live the good life. What is? I remember reading William Deresiewicz wrote that famous book, Excellent Sheep, where he said kids today, at Ivy League schools at least, are extremely good at things that they have no idea why they're doing. Wow. But they ask her this. There's a lot here. She said, the interviewer says, we all have more resources about how to be happy than any humans ever. And yet so many of us still find it so hard to figure out how to be happier. Why is that? This is what she says. She says, this is the way I frame a lot of the talk about happiness. Our minds lie to us. We have strong intuitions about the things that will make us happy, and we use those intuitions to go after that stuff, whether it's more money or changing circumstances or buying the new iPhone. But a lot of those intuitions, the science shows, are not exactly right or are deeply misguided. That's why we get it wrong. I know this stuff, but my instincts are off. After a busy day, I want to sit and watch crappy Netflix TV shows, even though I know the data suggests that if I worked out or called a friend, I'd be happier. But to do that, I have to fight my intuition. We need help with that, and you don't get it naturally, especially in the modern day. There's an enormous culture around us of capitalism that's telling us to buy things, and a hustle achievement culture that destroys my students in terms of anxiety. We're also fighting cultural forces that are telling us you're not happy enough, or happiness could be just around the corner. Now I want to pause before I give her next answer. What do you think? Our intuitions lie to us. #low anthropology.
Yeah.
What do you think about? I mean, she's. RJ. What do you think?
My first thought is the intuition. Not that everyone has, but I think the segment of the population that this professor is speaking to. Your intuition is always, I have to do something about it. I have to do something. And maybe the answer to happiness a little bit more is no, you don't. You can do, it's okay to do nothing. It's okay to rest in the moment. It's okay to wait. It's okay to not be active all the time. Because even the way she couches the decisions between, do I watch a Netflix show or do I work out? What do I do? Why does it always have to be a choice about doing something? And I fall prey to this, right? I always have to be doing something. And yet performancism, production, while it is satisfying a lot of the time, also can leave you pretty burned out and empty feeling. And that doesn't seem to be an option that's held out very often. You know, what about the option to just do nothing?
What do you think,
What
Sarah?
about the option to, as Chad Bird said, I love in the devotional, when God says, be still and know that I am God, it's actually more rightly translated, shut up and know that I am God. You know, stop talking and stop doing anything and let me fight your battles for you. So sorry, Sarah.
You know, I have this mom's group at church, and we did Zoom last night, and these women were like, I'm sorry we haven't been around church a lot. And I was just finally like, yeah, so like none of you have been around church a lot. It's okay. You know, like it's okay. And I know that everyone is, I don't know, there's like a whole debate in the church right now where everyone's like, it's time for everyone to come back. And this is when we tell them. And I'm like, yeah, because that always works. Always. That absolutely works to shame people into coming back 100%. Also, like these women have children who aren't old enough to be vaccinated yet. And they're terrified. And it's like, yeah. I mean, one of them just got through chemo and she's terrified. And it's like, you know, I think just to be able to say like rest in grace, like you're going to come back when you're ready to come back.
This is the time you really need it.
Yes. Like it's just, I don't know. So I guess I struggle. I'm interested to see what else you're going to read, Dave, because I actually struggle. Like when you read this, I was like, gosh, I'm uncomfortable. I can't figure out why. And it's RJ said it. Like, it's this weird, like, well, you do the good thing or you do the bad thing. And it's like, what if you do nothing, you know?
Well, it kind of plays into, I'm going to skip one answer we'll come back to, but
what if it doesn't actually matter?
Is it possible that practices that lead to happiness, like accepting anxiety, avoiding comparison with others, and being satisfied with what we already have, can also lead to complacency? Don't you need some of the emotional detrimental stuff in order to achieve? This is what she said. This is basically like, should we sin more that grace may abound? This is what they're asking. She says, people have looked at this in the context of things that we worry about when it comes to complacency. Huge problems, from anti-black violence to the climate falling apart. We need people to recognize these issues, get angry, and take action. There's a worry that maybe if you follow these practices, you'll be so complacent, i.e. happy, that you'll let California burn. There's been some lovely work on this by a researcher named Konstantin Kushlev. What he finds is that the people who self-report the highest positive emotions, they're the ones who are taking action. This comes up in other domains too. There's evidence that people who experience more gratitude have a high level of what's called self-regulation, kind of like sucking it up and doing the hard things. Now, there's also evidence that people who are more grateful are more likely to do things for other people. So I worry about complacency, but the evidence suggests that it doesn't work in the way we might expect. When you do have some positive emotion, you have the bandwidth to deal with other things.
100%.
I mean, that's grace. I mean, that's what...
Yes.
You're saying these people, the kids, don't have to do anything, or these Christians don't have to do anything. That's going to mean that they're all just going to do nothing. But it is a deep fear, and it's especially a fear among, I think, students and younger people, that, like, if we tell them it's okay not to be completely anxious about that next grade, that they will somehow stop achieving, and they'll stop doing anything, or they won't care about the less fortunate, or if we don't constantly shame them about how much they have, they will never give of themselves. And what she's saying is the truth is that that's actually not how it works. Complacency is not the problem that people think it is, or at least it works differently.
I mean, I remember like the sharp contrast when I went on Lexapro. This episode brought to you by our sponsors at Lexapro. I suddenly wasn't writing as much, and it's because I didn't have this like anxious drive in my head that was like, you have to write more, you have to keep producing, people want to read what you write, like you have to have a take on this. And I realized I was gonna have to make an exchange for writing more, for actually having a better quality of life, where I was happier, and I will take that shit all day every day, you know, like that's worth it to me, like. But yeah, I mean, I'm able to be more present in my life. I have more capacity for happiness, and I'm, you know, but that also means like I'm less productive in terms that the world defines as productivity, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it is very reassuring to hear. The other thing I would say is like, and I'm sure Dave, you've seen this, you know, and RJ, I'm sure you've seen it because you've worked with young people before. Like the other thing that happens is you're like, I have to do this, I have to do that. I'm going to sign up for this and I volunteer for that. I have to make really, 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 really good grades. And suddenly you actually can't get out of bed. Yeah. You actually are super depressed, like, because you just don't have any more capacity anymore.
I find that there's a cultural assumption,
whitewashed tombs.
Yeah, that shame can motivate goodness, and it can motivate a few things. I mean, it can motivate you very in the short term, but like, and by the shame, I mean yelling at, in my case, it's like sort of young kids who grew up at prep schools, like yelling at them about how privileged they are. It's like, that may be the case. They may be too privileged, but has yelling at people about that ever inspired them to do lasting service in the world? It just doesn't work. It doesn't mean it's less true, but it didn't work when it came to you, when your parent tried it with you because you weren't grateful enough in your own economic or context. That's what I find, that the complacency thing is there's a fear about, well, we can't allow people to relax because California is burning. And the truth is, as I think Nadia said it, like I can only focus on one fire at a time, and if I'm thinking about all the fires all the time and how I've personally contributed to them, then I'm just going to sort of go walk into the fire and let myself get burned up.
Yeah. Also, like, should I get a bucket? Like, what do you want me to do? Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, that's the, I don't know.
RJ, what are you thinking?
Well, I was thinking two things. One, this is a bit pithy, but true. I wish Vladimir Putin was a little more complacent. You know, I think there's a lot of things that
Wouldn't that be
happen in the
nice?
world because, as Blaise Pascal said, all the evil in the world can be boiled down to a person's inability to sit quietly in a room by themselves.
Yeah.
We have to have something to do. I've got to justify my existence. I got to do something.
Grow,
you know, and got to grow. You got to do something.
Take.
But on the flip side of the anxiety thing, I think I found a little peace the past couple years. Like, don't get me wrong. I want to be a little bit less anxious than I am, but I'm also coming to terms with the fact that I don't suffer from like diagnosable anxiety. You know, I'm just sort of generally an anxious person.
Okay.
But I also, well,
If
so
you
I
need to
say.
think so.
So I
If
say.
you need to think so, baby, that's fine. Okay, keep
Thank you.
going.
I appreciate. Thank you for allowing me to maintain my illusions. I'm coming to peace with the fact that this is kind of sort of who I am,
Yeah.
and it's part of what makes me who I am and makes me good at some of the things I'm good at. You know, like preaching or teaching or just generally caring about things. Or my wife is kind of the same way. You know, like our marriage therapist said to us at one point, she's like, "You seem to be pretty comfortable living with your hair on fire," and we're like, "Yeah, we are." You know, and we sort of wish we weren't, but we are, and we'd like to be a little bit less of our hair on fire. But then when we actually have a moment to take a deep breath, we're not sure we like it. You know, so part of it is embracing your whole self, you know, and not just the things that you like, but also the things that you maybe wish were a little bit different, but recognizing that they're kind of what make you who you are. And also that, as the great Bishop Ed Salmon once said, love relationships necessarily create anxiety. When you love someone or something, you worry about it or you worry about them. What, you know, if there's like no love, if there's no love, there's no worry.
Where there's no love,
But once
there's
love,
no grief. There's no grief without love.
Yeah.
no, but if there is, then there is.
Worry.
And that's okay. That's,
Yeah.
you know, I don't need to be anxious about the fact that I'm anxious. Like,
Well, she
it's
touches
enough.
down into our personal spheres with one of these questions, where I think the Times writer astutely asks. He says a lot of the stuff that we can know can have a positive effect on happiness, developing a sense of meaning, connection with other people, meditation, and reflection, are commonplace religious practices.
Dun, dun, dun.
How helpful are they outside of religion, he asks. This is what she
Celebration
says.
of discipline.
There's evidence that cultural structures, religious structures, even smaller groups like CrossFit, can cause true behavior change. The question is what's driving that. Take the religious case. You could mean two things by saying you need a cultural apparatus around the behavior change. One is you need a rich sense of beliefs. You need to buy into theological principles to get the benefits. Another, that is your commitment to these groups that does it. And it doesn't have to come with a set of spiritual beliefs. There's a lot of evidence that religious people are happier in a sense of life satisfaction and positive emotion in the moment. But is it the Christian who really believes in Jesus and reads the Bible? Or is it the Christian who goes to church, goes to the spaghetti suppers, donates to charity, participates in the volunteer stuff? Turns out, to the extent that you can disentangle those two, that's a big caveat.
I was like, what?
She doesn't say that. It seems to not be our beliefs, but our actions that are driving the fact that religious people are happier. That's critical, because what it tells us is that if you can get yourself to do it, to meditate, to volunteer, to engage with social connection, you will be happier. But it's just much easier if you have a cultural apparatus around you. Now, this is kind of me talking. This is one of my pet peeves, because you hear this language all the time about, okay, religious people are happier, and the sole reason that is because of their increased social connections. Like you go to church and you see people, and I think that that's very important. We've talked about it every couple weeks on this podcast. We give this advertisement for church as the only place you're going to go and be with these people that you may not even like, that there have no other reason to getting together with. There's no affinity other than simply you're there and you're
Jesus.
frankly on your knees together in Jesus. And yet, I think that correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like there's such a resistance to the idea, though, what if something about the hope that they are receiving on a weekly basis, or that is being preached to them, did have an impact on their well-being? Like, would that ever there's such a resistance to believing that? It's like, it feels like there's I sound cynical, but there's like what if it's both of these things?
Right.
And it'd be much more interesting to me if you found out within religious circles who are the people that tend to be happier and who are the tend to be more anxious. I have a feeling that we would be talking about the ones who were frightened of hellfire and damnation would probably be very anxious and not that happy, even though they are bounded by social networks. I have a feeling that folks, or a suspicion that those who are being preached the grace and forgiveness of God and in Christ would, and in the face of death, hope in the face of actual physical death. I have a feeling that that would have an impact, especially as to the extent that it creates not fear of one's neighbor, but love of one's neighbor. Is this just me trying to confirm my own biases?
I mean, all I can think about is like the only people, and it's rarely happened, but who have ever yelled at my children at church are the people who volunteer for like everything and are always like, you know what I mean? Like, they're just like super keyed up all the time. So much so that they think that they're also in charge of the outdoor altar that, just for the record, looks a lot like a playscape if you're a 4-year-old boy, you know? So yeah, it's just like that is like an interesting thought. Is I just like do not like this idea that these are two different like archetypes of church people. That like, I think if you're the person that is showing up to do all this stuff, you're also a person that has a rich spiritual life. Like, I don't think the interior life. Like, I just don't. I haven't met that person at church that like shows up and does everything. And I'm not saying like they don't struggle with their faith. I think struggling with faith is a part of having a deep interior spiritual life.
Right.
But I think those are the same person. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a false thing. Is like there's a perception that there's these vast amounts of churchgoers out there who don't really care one way or the other what's being said, and they're just there for the community. And then there's all these sort of like killjoys who care deeply about Christianity.
Right.
And
like,
the gospel, but don't care about their neighbor. And I think what you're saying is
it's like no one's ever read Mary and Martha. You know what I mean?
I guess the one thought that occurred to me was how serving at church is not cool. You know, it's not the cool thing to do. And that if part of me thinks, you know, now that I'm a priest, I shouldn't say this, but before I was a priest, is like, if I can find anything better or cooler to do than go serve at church, I'll go do that instead, right? But that maybe those who serve at church are the ones who just kind of given up on what's cool. And they actually just sort of want to be happy, and they recognize that like being around other people and serving at church, while it might not be carry much cultural weight, you know, they're not going to brag about it at the cocktail party. It actually just does kind of make them happy. You know, maybe there's something to be said more for that the gospel is sunk into a degree that they don't need to be cool, that they can be cheugy and, you know, serve at church.
Sounds like you're just describing yourself here. But it does strike me.
I think church is cool. I think it's like the coolest thing ever. I never want to do anything else.
I know you do, which is why you wrote a book called Churchy. I know you do, which is why I love you.
And we have like young moms on the altar go like, we think it's cool. Like, we'll talk about it at like church cocktail parties. You know, that's about the extent of it.
But I do know there's one more answer she gave that I thought was truly fascinating to me.
Okay.
They ask her, "Is there anything surprising to you that people are just not getting about happiness?" She says this: "For my students, it's often money. My fast read of the evidence is that money only makes you happier if you live below the poverty line and you can't afford to put food on your table, and then you can afford to. Whether getting super rich actually affects different aspects of your well-being, there's a lot of evidence it doesn't affect your positive emotion too much. Yes, there was a recent paper by Matt Killingsworth where he was trying to make the claim that happiness continues as you get to higher incomes. And he's right, but if you plot it, it's like if you change your income from $100,000 a year to $600,000, your happiness goes up from like a 64 out of 100 to a 65. For the amount of work you have to put in to sextuple your income, you could instead just write in a gratitude journal, or you could sleep an extra hour. I think that
Yeah,
that's like
totally.
it's. I always watch these students, and I feel for them as Katie Couric does. But especially when they're in romantic relationships and they want to get married, and they're trying to figuring out two different career paths, and I watch as 9 times out of 10, they try to either make both work or they simply choose the career opportunity over the love interest. And while the career opportunity is never negligible, it's never like unimportant. If you look at the actual studies, to say nothing of like, any kind of wisdom tradition, a sort of a loving spouse in your life will increase your well-being like 50 times more than another a job. And so like but they're never willing to rarely are they willing to sacrifice in that direction. They always sacrifice in the other direction. So I concur with what she's saying about her students fighting her on this.
One of my dearest friends from Mississippi, her mom, anyway, there's money there. There was like a rural cable company, which is like the most Mississippi story ever. And it's so funny that her grandmother owned and started or some crazy thing. But I remember her mom said to me one time, Sarah, money won't make you happier, but it will make things easier. And I always thought that was like a really, helpful way to look at the desire for more of it. But yeah, I find this whole conversation really fascinating.
I hope so.
It's kind of wild. Well, it's just kind of wild to think about sort of the different ways that we expect happiness in our lives. And I think about the things that have, like, in the long term made me happiest. And they were actually really hard things. Like, I think about having babies, was like really, really hard. And nothing makes me happier than my children, or like having been married for 15 years, which is really, really hard at certain points. And, and honestly, like after losing mom and dad, I know this is crazy, but every single day when I pray at night, I thank God that another day has passed where nothing catastrophic has happened. And that makes me really happy. That's like every day I'll be like, oh my God, a whole day went by where nothing horrible happened. How amazing. And like, that's a happy thought for me. So it's weird, like how I think the hard things are what make us happy. I think faith is such a huge component here that no one wants to ever acknowledge, because there is a hope in faith, right? There's hope beyond our circumstances. There's a way to make sense of our struggle. I just rewatched, and I highly recommend it, the whole interview that Stephen Colbert did with Anderson Cooper. And it's just, especially now for me to watch it, it's just brilliant, And Stephen Colbert is he's a happy dude, with a ton of loss. So I don't know.
It also strikes me that the pursuit of happiness is a uniquely American contribution to kind of world culture, And I don't want to say that happiness has not always been a thing. Like, I've got to think people at all times and all places have wanted to be happy. And I was going to say that, but then I thought about maybe it's not the happiness, it's the pursuit. The pursuit, that happiness has to be something that we achieve. Yeah. It's a goal that we reach.
It's a byproduct.
And that the goal is, and that it's not the pursuit of contentedness. It's the pursuit of happiness. And those are different things, right? Contentedness, I feel like, is almost a dirty word in America, right? It's like resignation. It's like it's almost like complacency, right?
Is.
But it's I remember Mark Laberton, who's this amazing, he's now the president of Fuller, but he was my pastor at my Presbyterian church in college, once said, American culture is an organized assault on contentedness. And I said, oh, that was and so I've never forgotten that. But imagine how much different our culture would be if, life, liberty, and the pursuit of contentedness. That would be, but that's not what we want. We want happiness all the time, as much as possible, and it's never enough.
We're going to shift gears real quick to something that with the School of Life that actually was highlighted this past weekend. Ethan Richardson of former Mockingbird fame is teaching a course. He's a therapist, and he's teaching a course on sort of communication. in relationships. And I think one of the ways we try to make our lot better or easier is through the process of nagging. Nagging. This is a fascinating story on nagging. So this is what Alain de Botton, or the School of Life, says. Nagging, if you've ever been nagged, is the dispiriting, unpleasant, counterproductive, but wholly understandable and poignant version of a hugely noble ambition, the desire to change other people. There's so much we might want fairly to change about them. We're an entirely imperfect lot. And so we want others to be more self-aware, punctual, generous, reliable, introspective, resilient, communicative. At home, we want them to focus more on the sink, the children, the bins, the money, and the need to put the phone down and look up. At a micro dimension, we might want to think more about the suffering of encaged animals, the destruction of our habitat, and the iniquities of capitalism. The desire to change people is no pathology. It's a clear-sighted recognition of human wickedness. That's his word. Nagging is, in its essence, an attempt at teaching, but it is also a version of teaching that has given up hope. It has descended into an attempt to insist rather than invite, to coerce rather than charm. One has grown too tired and humiliated by constant rebuffs to have the energy to seduce. Lamentably, it doesn't work. By the time one has started humiliating the student, the lesson is over. Nagging breeds its evil twin, shirking. The other pretends to read the paper, goes upstairs and feels righteous. The shrillness of one's tone gives them all the excuse they need to trust that we have nothing or kind or true to tell them. One changes others only when the desire that they evolve has not reached an insistent pitch, when we can still bear that they may remain as they are. All of us improve only when we have not been badgered or made to feel guilty, only when we have a sense that we are loved and deeply understood for the many reasons why change is so hard for us. We know, of course, that the garbage bins need our attention, that we should strive to get to bed earlier, and that we have been a disappointment in the couple. But we can't bear to hear these lessons in an unsympathetic tone. We want, tricky children that we are, to be indulged for our ambivalence about becoming better people. The tragedy of nagging is that its causes are usually so noble, and yet it doesn't work. We nag because we feel that our possession of the truth lets us off having to convey it elegantly.
First of all, I feel personally attacked because I'm definitely the nagger in my marriage and in my motherhood. Because I am tired sometimes, and I do just want people to do right, and I know better, that kind of thing. And it does not work. But the other thing I would say is that what we're doing from the pulpits to try to get people back to church?
Yes.
I mean, that's, yes.
I think so.
I think it is. And to his point, they actually will come back. They will come back for one whole Sunday, and then they won't come back again. I mean, I think that is very real. But you can make people feel bad. You can nag them into, they got to show up, and you should show up, and you should be here. And you know what? It's going to work once, and then they're not going to come back again.
It is one of these things where, just think about how it works in your own family,
Yes. Think about how it works with you.
Yeah.
Think about why your daughter lives in California.
Right.
Why your son never calls.
I mean, it's brutal, but it's real, it doesn't.
You say that. I mean, I think I'm sort of the nag in my marriage.
Are you?
But
I am for sure. No one would be bold enough to nag me about anything.
Right.
I mean,
I believe that.
I believe that. Yep.
They get near it and they're like, no, I see the look she's about to give me. That's a bad idea. So
Take cover.
Exactly.
This article made me think about two sort of little stories from my life, which I probably have told both of these at some point. One was, I think it was Tom Becker, the wonderful, amazing Tom Becker, who said to me once, he's in recovery, he's been in recovery for decades. He's an alcoholic. But he said in AA, the need to change anyone is taken as a sign of a lack of faith. Because if you actually believed in a God who could change people, you would not feel the need to do so yourself, nor would you dare to believe that you know what that person needs.
Right.
Because only God knows, and only God can do it. And I was like, whoa, the need to change somebody demonstrates a lack of faith. Yes. And then the other thing was when Jamie and I had been married, I don't know how long, maybe 10 years, something like that, little less, we encountered this idea that of the bound will, that free will might not be such a Christian idea, that we're all kind of somewhat enslaved to we can't change ourselves, basically. And we're like, what would it be like if we actually believed that? And of course, if you believe that, it means you have to actually believe in God and believe in the Holy Spirit if you're going to stay married to somebody. And I remember we realized, we were both Christians when we got married, and I was like the really good Christian boy who's like, I'm only marrying a Christian. I got to marry a Christian, right? I don't want to be, what is it? Unequally yoked or something like that from Corinthians. Is that the thing? I got to marry a Christian.
It's a thing.
And I thought it was just to sort of share a belief system or, because of Jesus, and that's true. But I also think it's because if you do believe in Jesus and you do believe in the Holy Spirit, it does actually tamp down your need a little bit, not always, but a little bit, to control your spouse. And you always want to control your spouse. You always want them to be different than they are. Right? And if you can sort of shove that aside and say, no, I can't change them. I'm not going to try to change them. God can, God will. He knows what's best. And that also the genuine love, as Baton sort of suggests, is loving someone even if they never change.
Yeah.
And because that's what you want. You want someone to love you even if you never change. And people do change. But sometimes they don't, and that's okay. And
Wait,
RJ, holding it all with a looser hand.
You yourself once told me the law says, I will love you when and if you change. And the gospel says,
yes,
I will love you in spite of the fact that you may never.
May never change. That's
and
right.
I think the gospel also says, I will love you if you do, if you change in ways that I'm not thrilled about. I think it's
that's right.
De Botton talks elsewhere about the giving. Love often looks like the space to allow a person to, to not necessarily for you not to dictate their path of growth either. Because they're gonna stay the same in ways you don't want them to, and they're gonna change in ways you don't want them to. It rarely happens that another person that we love follows our plan for their life or in.
Isn't this all just about us, right? I mean, that's the thing is it reminds me of pretty early in our marriage, we'd had Neil, and I was like, we need to go to marriage therapy. You're driving me crazy. And we went to marriage therapy, and the marriage therapist, I was like, we gonna fix him. That's why we're here, okay? I brought this guy, you're gonna fix him. And we showed up, and it was she just looked at me, and she was like, I think this is about you and your behavior. In our first session. And I was like, sugar jets, sugar jets. This is not a part of my plan. I'm not the one that needs to change, So I think that all of this nagging really, on some level it is right, when I think about the things I nag my husband about or my kids about, a lot of it is how will the world perceive us? But how will the world perceive me? As the mother who's taking care of you, or as the wife who's running a household, but how will I be perceived? I think is often it's the crippling thing that the nagger is probably dealing with, right? So
I do think that people who are incessant nags often are not somehow in control. Just if you don't need to be nagged about your nagging. Being told to stop nagging doesn't work either. And nagging is a form of control. I think it's usually, and it's usually is something that's given up on trying to be nice, and it's I'm just going to needle you until you do the damn thing I want you to do. But it does drive people wedges between them, and it is perceived as judgment. It's very rarely heard as such. It's I know I need to write those thank you notes.
Right.
But I also think the person who is doing that is just as in need of compassion as the one who is as the bum, the type A as much as the type B, as you might say.
Yeah.
It's not just grace for the type B here. Because nagging is a very understandable response to the fact that we're all broken, and and sometimes it just is too much to try to muster up some sympathy for another person, even the person you claim to love and have made vows to,
Especially that person.
Especially them. That's right.
Especially them. Well,
the quote I was
None
I was
of
looking for
this
that quote.
even business, Dave. That's an especially, okay?
True. What are you saying, Arch?
The quote is, women marry men hoping they'll change, and men marry women hoping they won't.
That
is very true.
That's a bad. It's a bad. But it's. I didn't make that up. That's out there.
No.
Apparently, someone thinks Einstein said it, but he didn't. Someone else did. Continue.
No comment. Yes. So we're going to move into a couple different things more about the church. This first one is in America magazine, which is the Jesuit.
Sarah's favorite topic.
The Jesuit magazine by Tori Lightcap. I love that name. As an Episcopal priest, I'm used to polite worship, but what we need to make room for, but we need to make room for unfiltered pain at church too. It's a little bit like what we talked about in the Crying in Church episode. He talks about growing up in a rural spot with his grandmother who was attended an Assemblies of God's church, a small church. And he talks about the prayer time. He says, I recall the words of the petitions of mainly these older women and their breathless urgency, such as, and Lord, if only my dear Ralph could walk away from that bottle and just tell us he loves us. You can help him do that, Lord. Can you? Will you help him do that, Lord? Or, Jesus, please bring us a living. The time of prayer went on like this, followed by the fading of petitions into a ponderous silence, and you just knew the Spirit was stirring the pot. Even at the age of 4, I knew it was tragic, or rather that it had to do with tragic circumstances, and it called for the most skilled and sympathetic of pastoral advisors. Well, across the tiny room, Grandma's gnarled hands, warm and ready over piano keys, would choose the right moment, and in the air, we would hear her most cherished tune. We would wait instinctively and sing out. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. I'll cherish it, I'll cling to it, I'll trade it for a crown. In the 4 decades since, in the untold hours I've spent in churches as an Episcopal priest, this is the same writer, I've come to formulate and hold an incendiary question. Why do mainliners like me feel we can't worship like this? Is expressive religion simply too expressive for liturgical types? What is at risk in giving it all away to God, like the ladies in that church seem to be so free to do? Is it because we have not been ground so far down by life that we have yet a sense of urgency about these things? I wouldn't know, but I kind of doubt it. We're all going through something. Would it be socially out of bounds to pray prayers some might characterize as loud, emotional, indecorous, or overly specific? Do we believe God to be incapable or disinterested to respond if we are too shouty? Or are we so used to simply whispering the names of those we love during the prayers that we can't imagine another way? Might we be afraid of finally getting God's attention? And what then? All these years in Episcopal congregations, I keep listening for the urgency. During this long stretch of the pandemic, I think I'm hearing that urgency from time to time. I don't necessarily mean something audible, but the sensation in the room of a people at prayer motivated by extreme circumstance, interior keening, quietly driven, silently guttural, but still the pointed result of some clear pain. Raw lament is alive in public worship, whether expressed with words or in the stillness of heart and gut. I want to remain mindful of the need we have to articulate it, in whatever way we would do it, in whatever way aligns with our tradition and practice. I want to hold a space for it, as surely as I hear Jesus beckoning to himself all who are weary and carrying heavy burdens.
I loved this piece. I love it now because we're talking about nagging, and I'm like, perhaps those people are just bold enough to nag God, and God is the one person who can handle it, or the one, being that can handle our nagging. Because that's essentially
so good.
What
Sarah,
they're doing, right? Is like,
That's what the Psalms are.
And yes, what are the Psalms if not nagging God?
Nagging God.
Yes. It's so good. I mean, I just, it reminds me of Dave, your dad, saying that, and this has like been quoted to me by several different people. So I've never heard him say it, which is so funny. But different people who've had hard things in their life have talked to your dad about those hard things. And your dad has said, well, you should be angry with God because God's the only one who can do anything about it. And, I think we don't have that kind of innate sense in our denomination. I don't think it's absent entirely. And that's part of the reason I love this piece is I felt like it was so graciously written. We have a place in our liturgy and the prayers of the people where you can sort of hold a silence and people can say things out loud. And I grew up at a church where everyone's a former Southern Baptist, including the priest. So people actually said things out loud. People felt the freedom to do that. And then I wasn't ever someplace where people did that again until I became a college minister. And when everything was happening with, and still is happening with, between Hong Kong and China, China's sort of trying to, basically take it back, right? And it's terrifying. I had a student who is totally American, has no family there, right? And every single time we did the prayers of the people, he prayed for the people of Hong Kong in their fight out loud in front of everyone. And I mean, it's incredibly moving, and it's funny. I used to really fully inhabit this space of like, we need to be more like that, And then my parents died and the liturgy was such a relief. I was given words when I didn't have them otherwise. And I really, really, really love the liturgy now more than ever, I think. But I think there are spaces and ways, that are important. I don't know, RJ, what do you think?
I was thinking about this Wednesday noontime women's Bible study that I lead, who are called the Stitchers, because sometimes we read the Bible and they stitch, but it's informally known as Stitch and Bitch, because they get together and stitch and complain.
Right.
It's so great.
Yeah.
I love that group so much. They're just amazing. And they've started to pray, and not just there, but in the community. Like one of the ladies came in a few months ago and she's like, I was at the hospital visiting someone and I was talking to someone in the elevator and I just prayed for them. I never done, like, what are you doing to us? What is happening? And I was like, that is amazing. And then a few of them are in the bell choir and they have practices on Monday nights and they are practicing in the church and the doors were open. And this family just wandered in because they heard the bells and they needed prayer for a really serious medical condition they were going through. And some of the ladies who were in this Stitchers group gathered around them in a circle and laid hands on them and prayed for them. RJ. And there's this new woman who's been coming, and she's new to our church, and she referred to the group recently as a bunch of holy rollers. And I was like, are we holy rollers? Are we? I'm like, that's awesome. Yes.
I love RJ leading this group, or like just
I do
being
too.
their cheerleader.
It's so great.
I mean,
love
RJ should
them.
only ever lead a group called the Stitch and Bitchers. Like, I just am here for that energy.
Between that group and then
so
my Thursday morning men's group,
beautiful.
I have never loved like leading Bible studies so much. So it's just it's cool. And we also we also do noonday prayer, together. And noonday prayer is beautiful. It takes 5 minutes and you read a psalm and you say a prayer and there's these historic prayers and it's just a beautiful melding of the spontaneous and liturgical and the Bible and swearing and it's just really it's the kingdom of God. It makes me very happy.
That's beautiful to hear. I wonder about this. This is what people forget, because there's so many people in liturgical traditions who've come from non-liturgical traditions, who've come from basically the Episcopal Church is full of Baptists and the Roman Catholic Church is full of former Pentecostals and things like that. And it's there's so much you gain by receiving these beautiful words that have been thought out and have been given to you and have just to be saying the same thing as other people have said, not only around throughout history but around the world at that moment, is a very, very beautiful thing. You do, though, and Simeon Zoll writes about this in his Holy Spirit book, you tend to lose a little the emotional immediacy that you get in, the sort of Jesus is my boyfriend type songs, but also just the small, that's what evangelicalism does so well, is the emotional piece, is this sort of like, let's stop what we're doing right now and pray. Let's not put some sort of nice bow, some sort of,
can't see our way through. Let's pray.
Let's, us to thy service, and let's not do some benediction. Let's actually talk to God right now. And I always,
in the name of the Creator.
I think that that directness is something, if you could marry it, and you can, to a liturgical, there's no reason not to. I think you've got a very, very potent thing on your hands. But I think that sometimes the lack of urgency that I see, at least in mainline liturgical situations, usually betrays a slight lack of faith or a sense of like,
I will say
prayer changes us and that's what's important. But and it does. I believe that. That's the AA thing, and I think it's true. But do you believe that prayer actually does anything? Because I think that.
Is anyone listening?
I think that God is actually there's some mystery. I don't quite get it, but it's not a gumball machine. But I do think that prayer actually matters, and like it's not just and I saw it, frankly, in some of our response to the pandemic and the way that what we prioritize. There just was a lack of urgency compared to certain other denominations or a different set of values. I don't want to get into I wish we were more like that, and I wish we were more like this. I just know that when you are confronted with that kind of urgency, and those sort of prayers often, by the way, do so for whatever reason come from older women. I just think it's a gift that God gives, and I always
their husbands are all dead. They've lost at least one kid in the war. You know what I mean?
There's a couple of women out there I know, and they're all in the kind of same demographic, and they all have Mockingbird on their prayer list, and I'm sort of like, thank God, because it's not a lot of
the prayer warriors.
Not a lot of old CEOs telling me that they're doing that.
I can't.
You're crying.
That's so. I mean, it's just like. Yeah, it's like when my grandmother died, I was like, who will pray for us Earthside? Like there's something about that lived life that just in those prayers that they, it's funny because we're not talking about, especially when we talk about older women who have seen so much of life. Like it's not like life has been easy. It's not like they haven't known death and loss and sickness. And yet they're still there with these words of faith. Like it is, I don't know. It's funny. My mom always really struggled in the Episcopal Church with some of the formality. And, I was raised in like a very, very low rent Episcopal church as things go. And she still struggled with it. And I remember saying to her, sort of towards the end of her life, because she'd really pulled back from church altogether, and I was like, what do you think, Mom? Like, where, like, I know you want to go to church, like, where should you go to church? And they had these neighbors that lived across the street who they were really good friends with, who were Black, who went to one of the Black churches in town, and who were super, super faithful. And my mom said, I'm thinking about asking Betty if she'll let me come to church with her.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I said, Mom, I think that's great. And she said, I grew up, and I wish I had talked about it with her more, but she said, I grew up in a church that was originally called Centerfield Baptist Church because it was in the middle of a field, and your grandmother, who had no musical training, was the choir director. And, it just was so vastly different. And I don't know. I always take a lot of comfort in the fact that as Mom was dying, the woman who was praying over her wasn't like, hold on, let me get my prayer book. You know what I mean? I mean, that was what I'm told is the nurse that crawled into the vehicle with Mom just prayed.
I think that there's this is one of the reasons why I find myself defending the prosperity gospel more and more. A lot of prosperity gospel churches tend to be multiracial or just Black churches essentially. And from my perspective, I'm not sure God's interested in what we call empire building or whatever it is, but you actually go to one of those churches and what you find is people are praying about what they're talking to God, not about God. They're talking to God about what they actually are thinking about and actually wanting and what's really going on.
Yes.
And my father talks about this all the time, and I can hear it in one ear and out the other. And then I actually go with him to one of these churches, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what we would dismiss as a prosperity thing is really just a bunch of people saying, what is it you actually like let's be urgent.
There's an immediacy.
And honest, and let's talk.
Immediacy.
And so there's I think that's really important, and it
And Dave,
doesn't excuse
isn't it so
everything.
much easier to judge other people than to ask God for what we really need? Isn't it so much easier to look at people praying that way and say, look at them in their prosperity gospel or look at them in their whatever, than to look internally and say, what is my great pain? What is my great grief?
It's like the Brazil article we read recently. Why are people going to the Pentecostal church? Because they're talking about actual real things and my real life and what I need. And God is here. They're talking about God as if he's actually here right now.
Yeah.
Well,
So yeah, but I will say there's a way to meld it. There is a way to meld it. I've seen it.
That's what
you
we're
know?
trying to do. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've seen it at work.
Yeah.
It's hard. But it is worth trying at least. That's what I think.
Absolutely.
Jason Micheli wrote an amazing piece this week on Mockingbird called "No One's Making a Docu-Series About Ordinary Churches." It's so good, and he says no one. He was watching a documentary about Hillsong and all that happened there in New York, the sort of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and at least the Justin
really good
Bieber
abs.
and,
oh my gosh, I've
Selena
never seen
Gomez.
abs like that on an ordained person. I don't know how.
Totally
he did
worth it.
He said,
totally worth it.
Definitely keto
He says the
diet.
truth
Okay,
is
keep
no
going,
one is
Dave.
producing a documentary tell-all about the guy who volunteers to dig a grave for a stranger, or the ladies who made lunch gratis for the 100 or so mourners in attendance at the funeral I did last week. Just as serial killer programs give us an outsized fear of our fellow humans, the stories of glittering, grifting churches and the celebrity pastors who are really whitewashed tombs obscure the everyday grace going on in ordinary churches. And I wonder if the zeal with which we consume these tales of the church's failures and frauds betrays an altogether different but alarming impoverishment. Contrasting a theology of glory with the theology of the cross, Gerhard Ferde, the Lutheran theologian, writes that a theology of glory's superficial optimism about our ability to be good and holy breeds ultimate despair. There's certainly an air of despair to of fascination with stories like Hillsong or Mars Hill. It's all a grift. It's all meaningless. If Ferde is correct, then such despair is the offspring of an assumption about Christianity that it is itself a lie. Christianity, as we will all remind ourselves on Ash Wednesday, is not about good people getting better, but about bad people coping with their failures to be good. The critique so many Christians bear today against Christianity is itself a Christian critique. The story of Christians' failings is a story first told by Christians. What's remarkable about the Old Testament is its character as a kind of ruthless diary of Israel's own unfaithfulness. The New Testament is no different in this regard. Not only is Christ's church built on a fool named Rock who tried walking on water, the apostles showed no inclination to expunge their spotty record from Scripture. They denied Christ. They betrayed him. They abandoned Jesus. And later, Paul attempted to kill them. The same Paul who confesses to the church in Rome, the one thing I want to do, I do not do. It's this realistic pessimism about our ability to be good and holy, a frankness that Luther called a theology of the cross, that frees us for the opposite of despair. He closes by saying, I remember a few years ago I went to the hospital to visit a pain-in-the-ass parishioner who had only recently passed around a petition to have me ousted by the bishop. I walked into his room only to discover that a lay leader who liked the parishioner even less than me, helping this man to use the bedpan. Only the gospel, the news of our collective culpability and God's ridiculous refusal to cancel us, could produce such an act of humility. No Discovery Plus series will ever capture such a moment on film, but it's not because such moments are rare. I've been a pastor a little over 20 years, and I have enough grace sightings to fill all the Sundays for the rest of my life.
That's so good. I mean,
Thank you, Jason.
It's as much as I love one thing I love about us is like we were just like the Episcopal Church really needs to like get a little, I don't know, like we could pray better, we could see God more immediately. Yes, we could do these things, and also still in mainline Protestantism, like I remember going in, a few years ago to a hospital room and like washing a woman's hair because that's what she needed. And there wasn't a nurse there to help. And like, it's just like, and I don't do that because I'm a good person or a nice person. I'm definitely neither of those things most days. But I did it because like somebody needed to wash her hair and I'm Christian. And like washing seems like the most Christian thing. So, I don't know. He's right though. We really are kind of obsessed with these stories of these massive churches' downfalls, and it's sad. It's like bad advertisement for us.
He quotes Francis Bufford saying that the church is a failing but never quite failed attempt by limited people to perpetuate the unlimited generosity of God in the world.
Oh, yeah, Christians make a lot of mistakes, but God also does amazing things through Christians, and I think in his grace hides them. Right? I think about that also a lot, about the hiddenness, right? What does Paul say? Your lives are hidden with God in Christ, and when Christ is revealed in his glory, so too will your lives be. That we won't actually have any concept of what good we've done or haven't done or whatever until sort of Jesus comes back and shows us. that he hides from us what he, the work that he's doing. And it's not glamorous, but it's not meant to be. It's,
I thought about, Paul Farmer, the doctor who founded Partners in Health, died this week, and he's kind of a very, very fascinating character. Did a lot of good.
So young.
Alan Jacobs unearthed this quote of him saying, "I have fought the long defeat," which is a Tolkien phrase. "I fought the long defeat and brought other people on to fight the long defeat, and I'm not going to stop because we keep losing. Now, I actually think sometimes we may win. I don't dislike victory. People from our background, like you, like me, we're used to being on a victory team. And actually, what we're really trying to do in Partners in Health is to make common cause with the losers. Those are two different things. We want to be on the winning team, but at the risk of turning our backs on the losers, no, it's not worth it. So you fight the long defeat."
Ugh.
It's so good.
Here's to the long defeat.
If that's the new mission statement for the church.
Fight the long defeat.
The long defeat.
I love that too because, gosh, I remember going to talk to a particular church foundation once, which shall remain nameless, because I was trying to get them to donate money to this amazing organization. And their basically response was, "We only support winners." That we won't give money until they've proven themselves. And I was like, okay, like I get that from a secular point of view, but we're Christians here.
Right.
We're Christians,
Right.
And then finally they did give a bunch of money to this amazing organization a few years later once they'd proven themselves. And I was like, just shake my head, dude. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Give money.
Well, I'm glad to fight the long defeat with the two of you, or at least to surrender, or whatever it is we do. I don't feel like fighting. But happy. This will come out probably right just before Ash Wednesday. So
Get your pancakes on.
A blessed Lent to all of you. Penitential Lent.
Hope our viewers really get it right this year. Our listeners. I hope our listeners really get it right. Anyway, thank you, both of you, and we'll talk to you again in a few weeks. Bye.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.